Kale rode aimlessly, mounted on Epona, the white mare that had belonged to his father. Her hooves beat the earth with a speed he could barely keep up with, ignoring the clumsy pulls of the reins he tried to control with trembling hands. The mare's coat, once pristine, was now dusty and damp with sweat, reflecting the faint light of the twilight fading on the horizon. Lysara's words echoed in his mind like a relentless drum, paced by the gallop, "Find the wardens." But where? He had never left Venth alone before, had never faced the world beyond the Elith Hills, with their golden fields and whispering streams. Now the sky darkened with every league, dyed in a heavy purple, and enemies seemed to lurk in every shadow, the men in black armor who had attacked them without reason, slaughtering armed soldiers and defenseless women alike, leaving bodies scattered like leaves after a storm. The smell of smoke still clung to his clothes, mingled with the dried blood that stained his hands and hardened in dark crusts beneath his nails. His entire world had been destroyed in seconds. No more strong father to lift him onto his shoulders, laughing as he raised him to the sky, no more loving mother to tend his wounds with her soft songs that seemed to caress the soul. He did not know if anyone in Venth still breathed, and the tears running down his face blurred his vision, making the night even denser, a veil that smothered all hope. Epona moved southeast as if guided by an instinct Kale could not understand, perhaps an echo of Toritha's commands, engraved into the mare's memory. He tried to steer her south, where the shadowy outlines of the twisted woods might offer shelter, but the mare snorted, hot air escaping her nostrils, and shifted slightly to the left, slowing her pace as night fell. Exhaustion overwhelmed him, trembling legs barely able to bear his weight, arms heavy as lead, and a hollowness that seemed to drain his soul, leaving only an echo of pain behind. He surrendered, dropping the reins and letting Epona choose the path. The mare now trotted on, her hooves muffled by the damp, moss-covered earth, for what felt like hours, until she finally stopped atop a high hill strewn with stones veiled in gray lichen. Kale slid from her back, collapsing to his knees, burying his face in his hands. The sobs came in waves, mixed with choked cries he tried to suppress, but that escaped like a wild lament. Epona nudged his tangled hair and ears with her warm muzzle, as if trying to comfort him with a tender gesture, but it only deepened the weight of his loneliness. There were no fruits, no orchards, only the gnawing hunger forming in his belly, the grief strangling him, the darkness engulfing him, and the crushing weight of a loss he could scarcely name. Shivering from cold and despair, his body spent, Kale finally drifted into sleep, his face resting against Epona's mane, while the mare stood guard beside him. He lifted his eyes at dawn, the pale morning light breaking through, despite everything, filtering between the distant treetops. He wiped the dried tears from his face with the torn sleeve of his shirt, feeling the salty crust of dried blood under his fingers, and spotted a faint glimmer in the distance. A campfire, dancing like a red eye atop the low hill ahead. At the summit, men clad in black armor laughed and counted their spoils beneath the artificial lights hanging from tents, their voices carrying a cruel tone that chilled his blood and made his skin prickle. An animal stolen from the village, or perhaps a sheep from Auren, roasted over the flames, and the succulent scent of meat filled the air, making his own stomach growl like a trapped thunder. Hunger gnawed at him like a beast, a void he had never known, for in Venth the table had always been abundant. But fear kept him paralyzed, his legs still weak from the almost sleepless night. Kale drew a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs, trying to remember everything Torith and Lysara had taught him. He grabbed a thick, sturdy branch he found on the ground, testing its weight with uncertain hands, and began to sneak downhill, his heart pounding so hard it seemed to echo through the damp earth, each step a battle against terror. The camp was organized chaos, tents poorly assembled, their torn canvas flapping in the wind, weapons scattered around as if discarded after the massacre, and cages hung from the branches of ancient willow trees, their drooping leaves like dried tears. Cale froze at the sight, the blood in his veins turning to ice. Children. Many of them, some unconscious, their limp bodies slumped against rusted bars, others wide-eyed in terror, their gazes reflecting the firelight. Where were they being taken? His chest tightened, a knot rising in his throat, but he pressed on, crouching low between thorny bushes and twisted trees, the branch clutched tightly against his chest. It was then that he heard it, a soft, frightened "pest," almost swallowed by the crackling wood. He turned, the shock nearly forcing a scream from his lips, but he stifled it with a painful effort when he recognized those wide blue eyes. Leora! His childhood friend, her hands bound with rough ropes, her clothes stained with dirt and dried blood, imprisoned in a cage that swayed like a broken nest under the weight of the wind. A brief, burning smile rose to his face, but it died quickly. She was alive, yes, but the fear in her eyes mirrored his own despair, a reflection of a nightmare they now shared. Cale crouched and sprinted toward the tree, moving as fast and as silently as he could, his heart pounding against his ribs. Most of the children were drugged, their limp bodies slumped against the bars. He remembered the stories his father once told him, but he knew he could not save them all, not alone and unarmed, guilt gnawing at his conscience like a starving dog. His eyes scanned the ground and found a small knife lodged into the bark of a nearby white-trunked tree, likely forgotten by one of the soldiers in their cruel haste. He wrenched it free, feeling the cold weight of the metal against his sweaty palm, tucked his makeshift branch weapon into his belt, and climbed the tree swiftly, his trembling hands cutting through the ropes that sealed the cage door. Leora collapsed into his arms, trembling like a leaf in the wind, and he helped her down carefully, holding her tightly against his chest.
"What will we do?"
she whispered, her voice hoarse with fear, almost a lost whimper in the night.
"I have to find my sister."
She continued, her eyes shining with a fragile hope, like a candle flickering in a storm. Cale shrank inside, the weight of the truth crushing him. Deep down, he knew her little sister had likely not survived. The massacre at Venth had been swift and brutal, a blade that severed everything they loved. But he could not bring himself to say it. The words stuck in his throat like stones.
"Leora, we need to find food and get out of here. They're everywhere,"
he said, trying to sound firm, though the sentence was truer than he realized, an echo of the destruction surrounding them. Before they could even plan, dark hands seized Cale's shoulder with brutal strength, yanking him away from Leora as if he were nothing but a rag doll.
"Help here!"
The soldier shouted, his sharp voice echoing across the camp, waking the trees with its cry. Panic surged within Cale, a cold wave threatening to drown him, but he remembered Toritha's lessons. Stay calm, use your strength at the right moment, like a river finding its current. With a swift movement, he pulled the knife from the ropes and drove it into the gap between the man's armor plates, right in the space between the arm and chest. The soldier screamed, a high, piercing sound that ripped through the morning air, stumbling backward, and Cale didn't hesitate. He lunged, driving the blade into the man's neck with an effort that made his muscles burn. The body fell, hot blood staining Cale's hands and dripping onto the earth, and for a moment he froze, the weight of what he had just done hitting him like a blow, the metallic scent thick in the damp air. His father's words echoed in his mind, heavy with a sorrow he wasn't sure he could bear.
"Killing is never easy, my son, because with the body dies an entire story. And that is always sad. May it always be your last choice."
But there was no time to think about it. 3 more soldiers emerged from the tents, drawing swords that gleamed in the firelight. One of them seized Leora, yanking her backward with a grunt, while the others leveled their blades at Cale.
"If you want her to live, drop the knife and surrender, boy."
Lucky for you, we need the brats alive. Otherwise, I'd skin you both right here.
Growled the man, his eyes cold as stone beneath his dented helmet. The second soldier laughed, a guttural sound that made Kale shiver, his mind spinning with scattered thoughts.
Who's going to miss too? We've got dozens of little rats. We can have a bit of fun first. I still haven't gotten the taste of ash out of my mouth since yesterday. And this brat interrupted my breakfast. I hate when someone interrupts my breakfast.
The others laughed along, their yellow teeth glinting in the firelight.
That's right. Let's start with the boy then. The girl's still behaving. Let's see how long she lasts before she screams,
said one of them, advancing with his sword raised, the metal hissing through the air. Kale lifted the branch, blocking the first attack with an impact that reverberated painfully through his arms and shoulders, surprising the soldier, who stumbled back a step. But the treacherous ground betrayed him. His foot caught on an exposed root, and he lost his balance, crashing onto his back, the branch slipping from his hands. The two soldiers closed in, wicked smiles stretching across their filthy faces, swords gleaming like promises of death. Kale rolled to the side, his heart pounding wildly. Leora's eyes filled with tears, and a desperate scream tore from her throat, a cry so sharp and powerful it made the men clutch their ears, staggering as if struck by an invisible blow. Kale felt a shiver run down his spine, a vivid memory of Lysara's songs the day before, when her harp had stopped the invaders. How had she done that? He had never paid much attention to his mother's lessons, lost in his training with Torith, but now, with Leora's voice reverberating through the air, something inside him stirred, a deep vibration, as if the Lume within his chest was awakening from a long sleep. Kale pushed himself to his feet, regaining his stance, while out of the corner of his eye he saw more men approaching the unexpected commotion, many still without armor, stumbling as they were roused by a sound they had never heard before. The soldiers recovered, lifting their swords with trembling hands, pure hatred gleaming in their eyes. Leora seized the moment to run behind Kale, clutching onto him, but there was no escape now. They were surrounded, and the soldiers were no longer playing games, their faces twisted with rage. The leader struck again, and Kale defended himself as best he could, but this time, the branch couldn't withstand the force. It snapped in two, and the sword slashed so close to his face that it left a deep gash across his lips, splattering his face with blood. Suddenly, the ground trembled, a vibration so fierce that the stones around them leapt into the air. The flames of the campfire exploded upward, licking the sky like a beast awakened, and the tents collapsed as if blown apart by an invisible wind. The soldiers screamed, falling to their knees, their weapons slipping from their hands. Kale didn't know what was happening, but he felt a crushing weight inside his mind, as if something deep within him was breaking, a barrier he hadn't even known was there. His gray eyes flared with a feverish light, and a guttural lament tore from his throat, not a word, but a primal sound, heavy with pain, rage, and despair, as if all of Vent's sorrow was pouring out of him. The trees around them twisted, their branches stretching like living hands, tearing themselves from the earth. The cages crashed to the ground with brittle snaps, the impact cracking the silence. The soldiers were thrown backward, their bodies slamming into rocks and tree trunks with sickening thuds, bones snapping like dry branches. One tried to crawl away, moaning, but a branch speared through him like a lance, silencing him with a final, gurgling gasp. Leora, still dazed, felt a crushing weight on her soul, as if an invisible rope was pulling her inward, deeper into herself. Her blue eyes turned almost white for a moment, and the sound of her voice transformed into a high, almost celestial melody that sliced through the air like a blade of light. The air around them shimmered, and a pale glow enveloped both Kale and her, forming a barrier that repelled the last desperate attacks of the soldiers, who thrashed like insects caught in a web. The children in the cages began to stir, waking with confused moans, some crying, others screaming, others running in blind panic, but the chaos was too much for Kale to process. He dropped to his knees, his head pounding as if it would burst, the laments still echoing inside him like a broken drum, each beat a reminder of blood and destruction. He didn't control it. The power was wild, like a fire consuming everything, including himself, scorching his sanity with visions of torn bodies and distorted faces. Leora, trembling, gripped his hand, her fingers cold against his burning skin.
Kale, what was that?
She whispered, her voice frail, almost lost in the noise of the wind still howling through the trees. He didn't know, but his scream had instinctively channeled the laments, guiding them away from the camp. The light around them pulsed one final time, and it transported them, not far but enough, to a clearing at the edge of the twisted woods, south of where they had been. The dark trees surrounded them, their black, gnarled trunks twisted as if burdened by 1,000 years of suffering. The air was thick and damp, carrying the scent of wet earth, and something sharper, something acidic, perhaps the Lume itself corrupted by the presence of the evil men, or simply the despair clinging to the night. The silence was dense, broken only by their ragged breathing and the sound of Epona's hooves, pacing on the ground, staring at them with wide, startled eyes. Kale clutched his head in his hands, his eyes wide with terror, the blood still dripping from the cut on his lip.
I don't know what I did.
He murmured, his voice trembling as if it carried the weight of a mountain. The power that had erupted from him wasn't like the training with Torith, precise blows and sweat on the earth, nor was it like Lysara's gentle songs that always brought peace and warmth. It was something alive, chaotic, something that scared him far more than any soldier ever could. He saw flashes in his mind, torn bodies, the blood of the men he had killed. Leora's scream cutting through the air. A wave of nausea hit him, the taste of bile and blood rising in his throat, and he vomited beside a gnarled root, his body shaking. Leora, still pale, looked down at her own hands, her palms smeared with dirt and tears.
I felt it too. Like my voice could change everything.
She said, her voice low, almost a whisper lost in the forest. She hugged her knees, the tears falling silently onto her torn clothes.
And my sister. She wasn't there. What will I do, Kale? What if she's dead?
The last word came out as a sob, and she buried her face in her arms. He didn't answer immediately, the silence between them filled only by the distant sound of a hidden brook. The weight of what had just happened crushed them both, a trauma that would mark them forever. The power of the laments, wild and violent, had saved their lives, but had also left scars upon their souls. Kale still felt the blood on his hands like an indelible stain, and Leora carried the echo of her scream like an invisible burden. They stayed there, trying to understand what they had done, and trying to forgive themselves for what they had caused, the air heavy with the smell of death that still clung to them. Leora pulled herself together, sensing her friend's pain. She improvised bandages from strips torn from her own shirt, tying them with trembling fingers around the cut on Kale's lips, the knots hanging awkwardly at the back of his head.
Stay still.
The blood stopped flowing, but he was already weak, the effort of the fight and the shock leaving him pale.
This will help.
She murmured, applying a poultice of herbs she found nearby, not really knowing what she was doing. But Kale barely heard her. His eyes slowly closed, blood starting to trickle from his nose atop the wound on his mouth, and he collapsed, his body slumping against a thick root.